Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players of the gigging variety. I'm your host, David Holloway, and it's great as always to be here with you. And I also have the brilliant Paul Bindig with me. How are you, Paul?
Thank you, David. I'm well. I'm excited. Looking forward to another podcast.
Yeah, and we're both a bit excited as always about this interview. This time we're back in the UK again. And we're interviewing Mr. Clive Nolan. Now, Clive's been a prominent and influential fixture in Britain's neo-progressive rock scene since the mid-'80s, when he first secured the role as Pendragon's keyboard player. He's remained with them ever since, whilst also starting and playing in his own successful progressive band Shadowland and Arena. His masterful and prolific output has seen him voted Classic Rock Society's Keyboard Player of the Year no less than 10 times. Geez, I'd be happy with half a time. A talented songwriter and lyricist. In more recent times, Clive has founded a theatre company, which he'll talk about in the interview, which specialises in rock opera and musical theatre. He's also part owner of Thin Ice Studios and a novelist, which we'll link to in the show notes as well. There's no doubt that Clive is one creative keyboard player, and we think you'll enjoy this interview with him. Clive, can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to experience this, actually, and it's nice to talk to somebody. It's not like I'm kind of getting much of a social life at the moment anyway.
No, that's true. And we have been asking our guests the last few months about what they're doing to keep busy. So what are you doing to keep busy?
Well, a good question. I mean, I was actually halfway through a Pendragon tour when the virus became, well, like a real reality from our point of view. We were staying one step ahead of it for a while. And then venues sort of ahead of our tour were starting to have to close down. And then it actually ended up being a chase for the borders because we were in Poland. And then they were going to close their borders, and then Germany and Belgium. We had to kind of get back to England, so we just about made it. So this year, most of my year was supposed to be touring, but of course that's all gone out the window. So that all had to go. So I've been concentrating a little more on the albums, that various albums that I'm involved with, and using the time to kind of work on those, and even got to the point of writing a book. And I'm going to try and do some more of that as well. Basically, as a musician, I'm now trying to find other ways of earning money in the sort of in the industry that I'm part of. So, yeah.
No, great. And that's probably a perfect segue to, do you want to just give us a little bit of a potted history of your prolific and impressive career to date? So, I mean, perhaps we usually go back to sort of the childhood thing, what got you into music, and then all the great a potted history up until now that we'll sort of discuss a little further.
Well, my parents were music teachers, so there was a sort of inevitability that I would at least be sort of given the musical experience, as it were. I think my parents were more sort of classically orientated, and I went down that route initially, and I sort of started learning the piano, and my main instrument was the violin and the cello. And when I went to university and I sort of did music degrees and such like, so I kind of went down very much more kind of disciplined, classical sort of route. But somewhere along the line, I was also kind of playing in a rock band. I sort of thought, this would be an interesting experience. So we sort of started doing that. And then somewhere along the line, because at school I had known a guy called Nick Barrett, and he went on to do Pendragon, we sort of met up again, and I ended up playing in Pendragon. And that was the beginning of the sort of, the progressive rock career, I suppose. And off the back of that, I did some of my own albums with things like Strangers on a Train. I then ended up singing in my own band called Shadowland. We did 3 albums. I sort of wrote and produced various sort of albums for other people. And then a little bit later along the way, I met Mick Pointer from Meridian, and we formed Arena, which is another sort of progressive rock band, sort of leaning slightly towards the slightly heavier rock area, I suppose. And then sort of in more recent years, things that have been, because you sort of build up a certain amount of credibility over the years, or at least I hope so, that enabled me to kind of make slightly more choices of my own over perhaps the last 10 years. So I actually kind of moved into the area of musicals, which is something that has always been something that I've loved, and I've written 3 of those so far. One of which has been signed up to become a movie. Whether it happens or not, we'll have to see, especially now, but we'll see how it goes. And pretty much now running together, Pendragon Arena, touring, bringing out albums, and then all the sort of solo projects and such like that I do on top and the side of that. And here I am.
Yeah, no, look, great summary, and we're sort of going to cover each of those aspects. So no, that's brilliant.
So Clive, what is it about progressive rock that first attracted you?
Absolutely nothing. I didn't come into progressive. I didn't sort of make a conscious, hey, I don't know, this is what I want to do. I came at it completely from ignorance. What happened was, when I was at school, I changed schools for the 6th form. So for the last few years of my school education, I changed schools to King's School in Gloucester, which incidentally is where they filmed quite a lot of the Harry Potter school scenes. I just thought I'd throw that in. Not when I was there, though. It's a cathedral school, so it's got a lot of history. And I made new friends there, and they were very keen to sort of introduce me to the world of rock music and pop music, because I had absolutely, up until that point, I'd really been very much classical music and no interest outside of that. And I decided when I changed schools, it was time for me to try and have an interest to kind of, get what was going on. So I was getting these, as you would do in those days, collection tapes, compilation tapes. Mm-hmm. And then one day I borrowed £20 and I went down to the shops in Gloucester and I thought, I'm going to buy an album. Seriously, I had no idea. This was the time when punk was just starting to sort of appear. So I could have bought anything at all. And I literally went through the albums, vinyl in those days, of course, and I picked out one. I just loved the cover. I loved the feel of it. I knew nothing about the band, nothing about the music. It turned out this album was Genesis' Seconds Out.
Wow.
Right.
So, and I took it home. I played it, and initially I sort of thought, what the bloody hell's going on here? And then basically there was a few things that latched into my mind. I thought, I really like that. And then, within a few days, I couldn't stop playing it. And then the next logical thing for me was, because the thing about progressive rock is it does have a lot of classical elements. Mm-hmm. So for me, it wasn't such a massive jump. And then the next thing I said, hey, let's form a band and do this kind of stuff. And I remember the very first sort of band piece of music that we did, I literally sat down and wrote on manuscript paper and then turned up to the other musicians and said, hey, there you go. And they just looked at this manuscript and none of them could read music. So it was a waste of time.
Keyboard players curse, Clive.
Yeah, exactly. I know. But I fell into it. I didn't know at that time it was called progressive rock even. I just loved Genesis when I heard that thing. I loved that kind of music, which was a little bit more three-dimensional than just, say, a pop song that required a couple of verses and a chorus. And I sort of just, fell into it, basically. And someone told me, hey, do you realise you play progressive rock? I said, really? Okay.
Well, I suppose progressive rock is one of those terms that sort of, like all musical genre terms, it's been applied a bit retrospectively to a lot of genres too. I mean, you're just making music that you love and that sounds good, I suppose.
Yeah, yes, I mean, that's really true. From certainly the stuff that I've done, as a rule, we never really sit down, with the bands like Pendragon or Arena. We don't sit down and say, well, we need to have at least, one mellotron section, one track's got 20 minutes long. You've got to play a double neck. No, we just write songs. And it is very much about songwriting. It's not about scales and arpeggios and exercises and how long you can make a piece of music. So, the fact that people call what we do progressive rock is entirely up to them, but we don't sort of sit there trying to write it.
Yeah, totally understood. Talking about Arena, you mentioned before that you formed Arena with Mick Pointer, who was Marillion's former drummer, and you guys are still doing that to this day. I'm really interested, Clive, in how that collaboration came about and what's been the secret to its enduring success.
I don't really know. I mean, I certainly don't know what. I think that when I met Mick, he'd been out of the music business for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. My theory with this sort of thing, it's in your blood. So although he hadn't done it for a while, and obviously because I think he'd felt very betrayed by the whole Marillion experience.
Sure.
He wasn't going to be in a hurry to come back to it. And initially, when we first met, he said, "Look, we'll just make an album, and that's it." But it only took a few weeks of writing for the album before we were talking about it as a band. And I could, he was just, it was obviously in his blood, and we were going to come back together, which we did as a band. And I think that Arena, at the time when we first appeared, was probably for some people, maybe, I'm not sure, but for some people who perhaps got a little bit disenchanted with Marillion, might have thought that we were perhaps the alternative to that. There might have been an element of that in it. We had a kind of perhaps a more direct approach in the songwriting, slightly sort of heavier edge, which I think a lot of people liked it. So it attracted not just sort of progressive rock fans, but people perhaps from sort of other rock areas as well. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I just like to I hope it's because we write good music and people like what we do. I mean, I think there's always been a certain chemistry on stage with the band. It's a very strange cocktail, really. I think the very energy that makes us quite a good live band is also what makes the band quite combustible, which is why we've had so many lineup changes over the years.
That's gold. And over that time, Clive, with both Arena and Pendragon, and we'll talk more about Pendragon in a sec, your own keyboard playing, as you said, you had that more classical upbringing. How's your keyboard playing evolved over your career? So obviously, besides developing lots more chops and all that sort of stuff, just how's it evolved for you as far as your enjoyment and what you actually play?
Well, the funny thing is, I think of myself as a composer who plays some keyboards rather than a keyboard player who does other things. It's always been a means to an end for me. So that when we first formed at school, when I said, "Hey, let's form a band," there wasn't another instrument that particularly interested me. So I was the obvious candidate to play keyboards because I'd got up to a certain grade on piano, and it was a sort of logical progression. Plus the fact that I had a friend called Matt Clifford, who went on to be, who has gone on to be a very successful keyboard player in other things. And I remember we used to go to the practice rooms during some of the breaks, and he had a great sort of memory for all this sort of music. And he was the guy who introduced me to Rick Wakeman, and he started playing sort of all that sort of stuff, and we were just sort of learning to these little riffs and bits and pieces that came out of the Rick Wakeman stuff, and he lent me what was it? Yes, I know, it was King Arthur. Oh, yeah. And I've still got it. I never gave it back to him. That's I feel a bit guilty now, but somewhere up with my vinyl, I've still got King Arthur, which is his copy. But anyway, so I discovered Rick Wakeman at that point, and that was kind of exciting, because at that stage that we were just getting to the point where there were keyboards, as they were being developed, synthesizers and things were sort of all coming out, and of course the thing about Wakeman in those days, although actually to a great extent still, but he was just surrounded by this mountain of things, because each keyboard could only really do one thing. So you'd have the Moog, and you'd have the Metron, and you'd have the Hammond organ, and whatever. And that sort of made the whole thing look very dynamic and very exciting. Certainly in my earlier career, I had a lot of keyboards, because the more primitive the keyboards, the fewer things they could do, and the more keyboards you sort of needed. And it also got to a point by the time we got to the Visitor album, which was the third Arena album, and we went out and did the tour. I had like 9 keyboards, I had a set of bass pedals, and I had 260 new racks of samplers and sort of various things, and these MIDI patch bays, and it was a nightmare. I had two technicians used to set it all up. And it used to occur to me, you would walk on stage and start playing, and I'd be completely beholden to maybe just one lead. If one lead was to go a bit dodgy, you would have no idea what was going wrong. And so I sort of reached that point. And yes, it looked fantastic, I think. But it was sort of too much in a way. And at that point, I remember on that tour thinking, right, from now on, I'm going to see if I can sort of gradually diminish the size. And initially, I remember going down to 5 keyboards and thinking, how am I going to manage with 5 keyboards? How am I going to do this? But, and then gradually getting rid of all the rack units because the keyboards could do more. And then eventually you could put samples into the keyboards and sound effects and all that sort of stuff. And then I got down to 3, which was 2 in front of me and the piano on my left, sort of facing the audience. And then eventually I've managed to get down to 2 keyboards, which is for me the ideal setup. I love that. I wouldn't go less. I wouldn't go more if I can help it. And it works very well. And so that's it now. And I've got this guy designed this 360 spinning keyboard stand, which works on ball bearings. And I was the first person to test that out, I think. So I might have been the first person to actually have had a fully rotating keyboard stand. I know there have been others that go part way, but this was fully rotating at the time. So that's a lot of fun to play as well. So, once you've sort of established the parts that you're supposed to play, there's the added excitement of not knowing whether the keyboard stand's going to stand still long enough for you to play it.
That's good. And we do tend to talk gear here and there in some episodes, so this is probably a perfect segue, Clive, to maybe go back to the five keyboard rig, not to stretch you too far, and what you recall that you were playing around then, and then maybe your current rig, what you currently use.
Okay, well, the 5 keyboard rig, basically from many, many years ago, I was a Korg guy. Yeah. I am a Korg guy because when I go out live, much that it would be lovely to be surrounded by all the specialized keyboards. I want keyboards that are kind of jack of all trades because I need a bit of a string sound, a bit of a brass, this, that, and the other. And they may not be the ones exactly that we've used on the album, but they'll be, we can approximate and get pretty close. And of course, more recent times, it's a little easier. So in those days, I had moved on to the 01Ws, Korg keyboards. Great thing, of course, at that stage was, hey, you can put it on a disc and save the settings. That was the kind of big move in those days, a floppy disk. Yes. So basically, I had 2 01Ws certainly in front of me. I had a weighted keyboard. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I had a weighted keyboard facing the audience, which was my sort of mostly what I would use for the piano, and that was a Roland. What's it called? An A-90?
Yeah, A-90, yep.
Weighted keys, which for the most part was all about, like I say, playing piano parts of that. And I've got to be honest, I can't remember what the other 2 keyboards were. They would have varied. They would have been probably some kind of a Yamaha. For a while, I had a Moog and I used that live, and that was great, but. As we've been saying as I've been saying, it does one thing, does it really well, right. But it just does one thing. So there came a point where that just wasn't enough. So so I kind of went down to the 3 keyboards, and that was 2. I always remember it was 2 01Ws and the A-90. But half the thinking of this was sometimes we would travel to, America or South America. And I just wanted to try and make sure that it was as controllable as possible when I got out there. So it wasn't like taking kind of computer programs and things. I turn up in America and say, well, I want two 01Ws and A-90, and here are the floppy disks. So if you give me the wrong keyboard, I'm going to tell you where you can stick these disks. Basically, they had to be the right keyboards. So I programmed everything down 2 01Ws and the A-90. and then things moved on, and I sort of moved through the kind of the Trinity and and then I moved on to Extremes, a Korg Extreme, and I had to Triton, was a Triton Extreme, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right.
And I ended up with 2 of those. In fact, no, I tell a lie. I ended up with effectively 3, because I had the 2 in front of me, and I had the large 88 note one, which I've literally just sold a few weeks ago. And I love those keyboards. The great thing about them is they're really, well, for me, I found them very easy to program. You go to the multi-screen. Yeah, for me, it's all about having zones on the keyboard. So when I'm playing a keyboard, I might want something in the middle here, which is sort of the main part, but there's probably going to be some samples to trigger at the bottom end, and maybe a little high flute part at the top end. So zoning's important, and having so the kind of multi thing is important, and that's easy to program. And of course, because I was buying Korgs each new generation, the way that they thought remained the same. So I didn't have like a massive learning curve. I always tended to find with Roland, I could sort of get into a Roland thing, and it was a mystery as to, because their terminology was different. I remember that as well. It was, but anyway. So eventually, of course, I've now moved on to the where am I now? Two keyboards and Kronos. Yeah. So I've got a Kronos 88. And the top one is a Kronos 73 note one. And they're fantastic because they've got memory. You can load in all your samples and things from the album. They've got shed loads of sound, so you can approximate pretty much everything you need. I love them. They are my absolute favorite keyboards that I've had in all the years I've been sort of touring and playing. So yeah, that's where I am now.
Yep. No, great summary. And 2 out of 3 members of this interview own Kronos, and one would like to. Isn't that right, Paul?
Yeah, exactly right. They're wonderful keyboards.
Well, that means if I come to Australia, I know who to turn to if I need to borrow a Kronos.
Anytime.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anytime. And you made a great point before too, Clive, about that you always saw your keyboard playing as a means to compose. So what is it about your keyboard playing skills you felt has helped you to write and score, whether it's the musicals you're involved with, which we'll talk about in a minute, or pretty much anything?
Well, I think actually it's more to do with my overall education that's helped me. Because initially, when I first started going into the sort of rock music thing, I was thinking, well, I've done all this sort of, I've done the grade 8 of this and all the theory examinations, and I've gone to university and I got my, sort of Bachelor of Music, and I stayed on it and a Master of Music. I think all this education, orchestration and conducting and this, that and the other, and I'm going to play in a rock band. And I thought initially, I'm not going to need any of that stuff at all. And I sort of, I suppose when I first started, I kind of didn't. But as time went on, I have been able to take an awful lot of what I learned over those years and apply it and use it, particularly now with the musicals and a lot of other stuff that I do. There's a lot of orchestration involved, and that's one of my favorite sort of elements. As far as the actual keyboard playing is concerned, again, it's just simply whatever my limited ability is to play keyboards allows me to kind of put parts into the various sessions that I'm writing or come up with ideas that can be translated into songs. It's just my particular medium through which I can do the writing. But as with, I think, any composer worth his salt, I like to be able to imagine that I can think beyond my ability to play, if you see what I mean. Yeah. If my ability to play limited what the orchestra was doing when I'm programming an orchestra, then I think that would be a downside. So I need to be able to kind of imagine beyond my particular playing abilities anyway. Yeah.
No, great answer.
Clive, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about your career history, joining Pendragon at a young age and you were just saying that you were in the midst of a tour when this unfortunate COVID-19 thing hit. I'm interested in if the current Clive Nolan was to meet the young Clive Nolan who first joined Pendragon, would there be any advice you'd give him with the benefit of hindsight?
It would probably go one of two ways. Either I'd have a hell of a lot of advice, or I wouldn't bother. I'm pretty sure that if I went to the young Clive Nolan and tried to give him advice, he'd just tell me to bugger off. Because at the time, I think half of what gets you through this stuff is ignorance. In many ways, I think I'd be wiser to let him just get on with it and make all the mistakes that he'll make, because he won't listen to me anyway. But the one thing I would say, although it wouldn't necessarily be of practical use, is the fact that he needs to believe in what he's doing, because actually somewhere down the line it might pay off. And I think there was but then again, that's all part of the adventure, isn't it? You choose to do something, and you have an aim, and you have. I mean, I had, well, I still do. I have a lot of ambitions and a lot of hopes, and I have the sort of fantasy of doing various things. But the reality can be just as exciting as well. And it's certainly that my musical career has not gone anywhere near how I thought it was going to go. But I'm certainly not complaining about that either, because it's done. I've done some very good things. I mean, I will always wish to sell more albums. I will always wish to play to more people. I will always wish to be richer and more famous. But I think half of it's the journey, isn't it, as they say?
Well, yeah, I think so. And look, something you touched on there with that answer, was self-doubt something that you ever experienced along the way as a younger musician? And if so, how did you deal with that? How did you push through that?
Very much so. In fact, funnily enough, on the last album, I'm trying to remember what the name of the song is. On the last Arena album, which is called Double Vision, there was a song on there, and I can't quite remember what the title of the song was called, something to do with thieves, but I can't remember what it is exactly called. And it was actually about that sort of subject. There's this syndrome, I think it might be called cuckoo syndrome, actually, but I think it has other names as well, where you kind of don't feel that you deserve to be where you are. And I have suffered from that a lot. I kind of sometimes think, oh God, if anyone really knew what I could do or what I was, they wouldn't be as impressed as they seem to be. And I'm sure it's quite a common feeling. It doesn't feel like I deserve some of the accolades or some of the things that have happened.
So the mirror lies, Clive.
No, it's not the mirror.
Oh,
lies.
it's not.
No,
that was my try.
It's just something. If you've got the title, so I think one, it's got Thieves in the
title. Yeah, Paradise of Thieves.
Paradise of Thieves. That's the one. And that kind of touches on that very thing, whether I really have the right to be who I am. It's like I don't feel that I am the person people think I am. But then I also, there are times when I might feel that way, but there are also times when I think, hang on a minute, I've worked very hard. I've done this. I've done this myself. I've produced this, whatever. And why should I not deserve it? But yes, I think it's a natural thing. I think a lot of artists, a lot of musicians, a lot of entertainers, they crave affirmation, don't they? I mean, that's almost why you do it.
Absolutely.
And I only exist. Tinkerbell syndrome. Actually, I only exist as much as people clap. If you see what I mean, it's kind of, and that's a very important part of it. Although I'm at my happiest in many ways when I'm absolutely on my own, sitting here, writing the music, creating the ideas, and imagining what they could be capable of. So I've just had to clap myself.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Look, I'm really interested also, Clive, in where you see progressive music, the progressive music scene, or the rock music scene generally heading in the future, given you've been heavily involved for many years as part of it. What do you see the next trends being? What's around the corner?
I don't really know. I mean, history in general goes in circles. And I think music sort of does a certain amount. I mean, let's face it, the biggest sort of rising solid thing that you could buy is vinyl, isn't it? You would have thought that a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think that with musical styles, they go in circles as well. I mean, one of the things I've always found quite reassuring about progressive rock is, although it is sort of an underground, it's a consistent thing. And it has its little moments where it kind of rises and puts its head above the parapet, but it's a fairly consistent thing. I think rock music in general will continue to be what you think it is. I mean, technology will develop, and therefore, I suppose certain sort of elements of the sound in terms of production and recording will improve or change or what have you. But I think the basic spirit of what rock music is, whether it's progressive rock or heavy rock or any other kind of rock, will just continue down its own thing. I think if you were to arrive 100 years from now, it may well be there'll still be an underground progressive rock, and there'll be a heavy metal area and this, that, and the other, and there'll be probably some new sort of genres as well. But I think these other ones will just continue to sort of exist. And every now and again, they'll have their moment again. There'll be everyone will think it's all fresh and new, but in fact, all they're doing is listening to something that first turned up like 50 years earlier. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it goes in circles. Indeed. Just like pandemics.
That's right.
If you look back, you've got your Spanish flu, you've got your plague, and if you spend a little time looking at history, you'll realise how these things kind of developed, the second wave and sometimes the third wave. It always amazes me why people are thinking that this is such a mystery now with this thing that sort of hit us. If you actually look back, the graph will be the same. And I think people need to just take a moment and think. But there you go.
And speaking of true mysteries and that being of songwriting, I want to cover sort of your approach to composition, both from the band viewpoint and then the musical viewpoint. But starting off with the band viewpoint, you're obviously a very prolific songwriter and lyricist. What's your standard sort of, or if there is a standard process, do you tend to approach it a similar way each time, or it varies?
I've got sort of two basic ways of writing. One is doing it myself. The other is working with other people. So obviously, well, first of all, I should make it clear, in Pendragon, I'm not a writer. That's Nick Barrett's domain, and I'm very much a performer. So my job is as a keyboard player, to that band. But if we go to Arena and all the other projects that I'm involved with, then, my main part in that is as a writer. With Arena, what tends to happen is various people in combination usually will come up with little bits. And what we do is we collect just little ideas. It could just be a 4-bar riff. It could be a tiny little bit of something, I don't know. And I collect them all into a big folder or a little folder, depending on how much they want to offer. And then at some point, when it's time, I sit in this room, lock myself away for 4 or 5 days, or sometimes a few weeks, and basically put the album together. And that way, it's been a fairly consistent process. And my sort of, although I have a big influence in terms of, because I write a lot of the music, it's got to make Mick happy as well. So there's kind of a filter that the thing goes through. So it's not just me saying, right, there it is, there you go, lads, there's your album. No, it has to have, everyone has to be happy with it. So that's the filter, as opposed to if I'm writing on my own, then the only judge is me. And I'll be honest, I'm happiest when I'm writing on my own, and not because I have any problem with working with other people. It's just because I don't have to stop. If you work with other people, then you have to wait for a moment. Okay, guys, you have this, or what do you think? Or maybe you don't like this. And although I have to say, in Arena, when we've done this, there's rarely been a point where we've disagreed. So sometimes I'll play some material, like I've written a load of bits and pieces, and I'll play the bits and pieces to Mick, and he'll sort of, no, I'm not really sure about that, and I'll sort of think, well, actually, no, he's probably right. That doesn't sound quite right for us, or whatever. And there's never been any big disagreements. It's just that kind of, it's like wearing the right hat. Put on the Arena hat, then that's what you're writing. With the other stuff, it's still kind of hats. I mean, there's a big difference to what I might write for like the musicals, as opposed to working on sort of some of the other stuff that I've done. So I think it's kind of visualizing what the end project's supposed to be, in a way, what it is you're trying to do. And the other thing what inspires me to work is 99% of what I do is inspired from a visual element or a kind of very least a conceptual element. I don't tend to write abstract music. There's only about in all of the stuff I've written, there's about two pieces that I would say, well, yeah, okay, fair enough, they're just music. But most things always, for me, begin with a visual element, whether it's a concept like a story, which often happens with Arena, or whether it's a story and in a musical. I mean, if someone says, okay, give me the very first piece of music that's going to happen in this musical, I got nothing until they tell me it's 1874 in London and it's foggy and the lights are down and this, that and the other. And all of a sudden, then I can start to feel, or if I was stuck in some kind of ice cave, then I'd be using a lot of metallic sound. You've got to have a kind of well, for me, I have to have a visual stimulus to kind of make me write. And that works really well.
And so is that part of the reason you've become so passionate about musical theatre, because by its very nature is both a visual and musical thing?
Maybe, yes. I mean, as a child, I used to, I was an only child, so I had a lot of time to spare. And I used to sit and go through my sort of parents' records. And it so happened that they had a lot of musicals in those albums. And those are the ones that I gravitated to. And I didn't even know what they were about. So I might put on, I don't know, Sound of Music. And it wasn't that I really knew what the Sound of Music was, but I listened to the songs and imagined what was going on. And that was a great sort of flight of imagination for me. And I've loved opera as well. I love the theatre as a sort of place of bringing anything's possible. And that's why I love films. I love novels. I love fantasy. And I don't mean as in fantasy novels. I mean fantasy as in the ability to kind of imagine all these possibilities. And to me, music is a part of that. But I have to kind of, in some ways, I have to have all of it to be able to do it. It makes it much more fun, I suppose.
Yeah. And just briefly, do you want to talk about you've essentially set up your own project's not been fair to encapsulate it, but talk about what you're doing with theatre at the moment.
Well, as far as the musical is concerned, some years ago we started actually, because initially when I wrote the first one, which was She, which is based on a Rider Haggard sort of Victorian adventure novel, it wasn't far from being just a concept album. In my head, it was I wanted to write a sort of a rock musical, but that was where we were. But then we had an opportunity to sort of perform it on stage. And then later on, we had an opportunity, that was a concert version. But then later on, the opportunity came up that I started actually being able to do theatre versions of these things. And that was where I wanted it to be. And in my mind, the whole kind of world of the musicals that I work in is very different attitude and a different approach to making an album with Arena. So for when we make an Arena album, it's all about the CD, the latest album, promoting the album, going out on tour, playing it, job done, how many CDs have we sold, sort of thing. Whereas with the musicals, it's almost the other way around. It's all about the show, allowing that show to have some kind of organic development. So in other words, each time we've performed Alchemy, which is the second one I wrote, it's been different. We've added things and changed the way we've approached it and everything. And to me, the CD sales are not important. They are really just part of the merchandising that goes with the actual show. The thing that my kind of object for this, my ambition, is for these musicals to exist, preferably without me. That's always been my kind of big aim. Hey, you're performing, someone's performing Alchemy in Scotland, and I'm not even part of it. Yeah, I'll come up and see it. I'd love to, but and I'm getting close. I mean, there's this Norwegian group of people now performing. They performed Alchemy, and they are planning to perform King's Ransom, which is the third musical. Alchemy and King's Ransom are interconnected. They're part of the same set of things. She was a separate thing. And they're performing, well, they were going to perform it this year, but pandemic got in the way. They were going to perform it in February, but the pandemic's threatening to get in the way. So I think it's been delayed another year, but I'm still in it. They're kind of bringing me over to be in it, but I'm getting closer to that point where I will just be able to sit in the audience. So, that'd be great.
Speaking of sitting in the audience, many years ago, I directed a drama, and the condition of the writer of that drama was that on any given night, 4 tickets had to be made available so that the writer could turn up. So just make sure you write that into every single time you license it, Clive.
That's a good thing. And I actually, having said that, I have actually sat in a few performances of these shows. I'm just trying to remember how I ended up not performing in them, but I was part of the production, and I was probably financing it, so I still wasn't free of it. But I have sat, and I've got to say, having said that, I'd love to sit in the audience. I suppose it's because it was my production, it was my money on the line, but it was scary as hell sitting in that audience and watching that show, because I felt even more helpless than if I was on stage. So, and there was one point, because we use, there's a Victorian theatre in Cheltenham, which we've used, called the Playhouse. It's a beautiful little theatre and perfect for the kind of things we want to do. But you can't exactly fit an orchestra in there. We have occasionally kind of put a band together, but it's very hard to control the volume. So a lot of the time we use backing tracks. And there was one performance, and I was in the audience, so for whatever reason, I wasn't doing the stage version. Basically, they were singing one of these songs, and it's like a multi-voice song, and it's a sort of storm sequence in She. And the backing track just disappeared. Something had gone wrong, and they're sitting, and they're on the stage. The lights are all flashing for the storm, singing this thing, and the backing track stopped, and I just wanted to disappear into my chair, because it felt like everyone in the room, and it was sold out, so it felt like everyone in the room was looking at me. Of course, they weren't, no. But it felt like. But the wonderful thing was, and this is again because I was powerless, but on stage they kept singing. They just kept singing and going round this kind of chorus thing that they were singing. And somehow the sound engineer managed to kind of get going again. And the music just came in underneath them, and they finished the song. And I think, I would say at least half the audience had no idea there was anything actually wrong. They thought it was some kind of a cappella moment before the music came crashing back in for the big finale. And but the second half, that was the first half of the show. The second half, I hid up in one of the boxes where just the technicians were. I couldn't sit in the audience anymore. It was just too scary.
Clive, tell us a bit about your upcoming Song of the Wildlands release.
The Viking album, as I call it. Yes, well, that's something that has got me excited. It came out, well, basically, I'm going to be writing a third alchemy musical. I call them alchemy. There's alchemy, there's King's Ransom, and then there'll be a third one. Mm-hmm. And we did a show last year, and it was kind of like a best of the musicals, best of my musicals, bits and pieces put into like a new story. But I wanted to write one song that would be in the third musical, just as a kind of little preview. Mm-hmm. And in the story of this third musical, I know that it's going to end up, well, it's going into Norway for various reasons, which I won't bore you with now. And therefore, I thought, right, what I could do is give it more of a sort of Scandinavian approach. And then I started thinking Vikings and such like. So I sort of started listening to that kind of thing, Viking, sort of Scandinavian folk music, stuff that kind of called itself Viking music. Of course, we don't know what Viking music actually sounded like, but it's kind of interpretations. And I thought, well, that's great. I can do my own interpretations. So I put a song together called Macaria, which I really love doing, and I love the sound of it. And that really kind of got me hooked on this sort of what I'll call the Viking sound, if you like. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, wow, wouldn't it be interesting to kind of go a bit further, learn more about these instruments like the nickel harper and all these various things, and actually just do an album. So then I started thinking about this, and I thought, I'd really love to do that. And then I was a bit worried, because nowadays in today's rather sanitized society, if I was to do a Viking story, I would probably be accused of cultural appropriation or something. Yeah. So I thought about it longer, and I realized that, of course, one thing at my fingertips exists. It's called Beowulf. It's the story of Beowulf, and it's an English poem about a Viking story. So I thought, well, I can't, that sounds like the answer. So I went and I read the whole Beowulf thing, which takes about 3 or 4 hours to read. It's a big poem. It's a saga, not just the bit that you hear in Grendel. I just thought, this is perfect. So I thought, well, I'll do the album. So I've basically written an album based on the Beowulf saga, including, of course, his battle with Grendel and his battle with Grendel's mother and a battle with a dragon, lots of battles. And I brought in a lot of what I'm calling the Viking instruments. That's a very misguiding title for them, but it's to kind of give it that flavor. So like the nickel harp, which is this very old style, almost like a violin, but it's got buttons as well. And I thought I searched all over Scandinavia to find a player, and eventually I found this girl called Vicky, and she lives in Essex, so she's only a few miles away from here. And luckily, during the lockdown, she had her own recording equipment, so we were able to kind of get all that stuff recorded despite the lockdown. And the other thing I did, I put out the word on Facebook, and I said, look, does anyone want to sing? Because this album is very much about the chorus. Imagine it's like a Viking oratorio, if you like, It's all about the chorus, and I really wanted to kind of get plenty of voices. And loads of people came back to me, so I put a Facebook group together and called them the Wildland Warriors, and basically there's about 50 of them, and they all started recording. I would send out every week, I'd send out like parts and little simple mixes so they could hear what the vocal's supposed to do, and they would all start sending them back. So I spent 4.5 months editing all these vocals as they were coming in, which was great because it gave me something to do. It gave them something to do because they were kind of locked down anyway. And I ended up with about 200 voices per song, per track that has choir, which is fantastic. It sounds very big. So I managed to get that done and various other things. So the album is well on its way. I think we've got bass guitars and a couple more Viking instruments to put in, and we're ready to mix it. But it'll be out in March next year is the plan. And we're hoping it'll be in a really nice book format so people can really get to understand the story. I even managed to get myself a medieval consultant, this guy, one of the relatively few people who can read and understand Anglo-Saxon. And so the chorus are all singing in Anglo-Saxon, not in English, but Anglo-Saxon, which is very specialized. So I managed to get my expert to translate the choruses into Anglo-Saxon and then to do them phonetically, so that people like me could actually sing and read the parts. That sounds great. Again, it's a fantastic tapestry because you can't really understand what they're singing. And that will all be in the book and explained and everything. So there'll be a lot of the history elements in there, which I think will be interesting.
That's brilliant.
So I'm looking forward to yeah.
And I think J.R. Tolkien did a translation of Beowulf, didn't he, in the 1920s and 30s? Yep.
He did. And I've got it over there. Yes, he did do. There's the guy called Sean something. Again, I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I can't remember his name. Is the one that's the kind of accepted standard
one,
yeah, and that's the one I used as my kind of blow by blow account, if you like. But Tolkien did indeed do a translation, yes. And in fact, can you still see me?
We sure
have
can.
You still got? Have you still got me?
Yeah.
Okay, I know it's audio, but I managed to. That's the front. That's the very first page of Beowulf.
Oh,
of course, I didn't steal it from the museum. This is fake.
And just for our listeners' sake, it's written in blood. So how impressive is that?
Virtually, it looks like it. It's fantastic. Can't understand a single word on it, but that is the very first page. Because when it was written down, the story itself was probably already several hundred years old. We don't know who wrote the story. We don't know who wrote it down. We don't know who created it. It could even be partly true. Elements of it. There may have been somebody back there called Beowulf. I don't know. But it's had me fascinated anyway. I love the whole kind of the imagery of it all, and I love the feel of it all. And I've become very Viking in attitude nowadays, including the beard.
That's right.
Well, for the benefit of our listeners, you can jump onto YouTube, and if you type in Clive Nolan Dragonfire or something similar,
Dragonfire, yes,
the preview comes up, and you can actually see all the choristers singing in Anglo-Saxon. It is quite impressive.
It is.
And the sound of all those voices in it's that feeling of you don't quite know what they're saying because you don't know what they're saying, but it sounds really good. So I'd encourage our listeners to have a chance to check that out.
Yeah, really that was good fun, actually. I got each one of them to do a little video clip of that little end section of the song. And the director who wants to do the Alchemy movie put it all together into a little package, and that was kind of cool. I like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's come up really well. Now, Clive, we ask just about all of our guests this question, and it is to do with as a keyboard player, and you gave us one already as a producer and director and creator of the She production, but as a keyboard player, what's a memorable train wreck that has happened to you on stage that you've had to negotiate your way through?
Oh God, plenty. But I suppose one of my sort of one of the ones I remember the most. We was with Pendragon. We were playing in Holland, in a venue in Tilburg in Holland, and there was a song. Ironically, the song's called Total Recall. Ironic because of what comes next, but basically it starts with a kind of, there's a sort of, and it kind of goes off like this, and it goes round, like the lovely pianistic thing goes round for about 32 bars. Then it goes round again, and I think there's like a little bit of guitar, and then the next time round it has the vocal in. I was standing off the side of the stage before we walked on stage, and I made and here's a piece of advice I would give my younger self. Don't try and think about the songs in advance, not when the intro tape's playing and other things are going. So, of course, I tried to visualize this introduction, and I couldn't see it in my head, which, of course, was a problem. So we went on stage and we started playing the set, and I knew it was, I don't know, the third or fourth song. And even between songs, when the audience was clapping after another song, I was trying to go, and basically we got to the song. And I started, and basically it's a very serious moment. It's all very emotional. And the other members of Nick and Peter on bass, they're standing there over their guitars with their heads down, just, allowing the music to happen, the drummer, and same thing. And I started playing, and I thought, I have not got a clue what happened after the first bit. And all I knew was somehow, after this business, it goes all sorts of places. I knew it had to finish on an A chord. So I basically started playing, and then I just went off in a tangent, and I just started playing anything I could do to just keep playing. And I just saw their two heads gradually look up at me in total horror as they realized that I didn't know what on earth I was doing. And then I kind of got to the bit, and I sort of went, and I sort of like, here we go. And they'll know to come back in. And then we start again, and the whole thing happened again. I started the first few bars, Nick started the guitar part, I haven't got a clue. So by the time we got to the third verse, Nick knew perfectly well I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but he still had to sing the verse. And we made it into the next part of the song, which I did know. But the funny thing was, the lighting engineer very early on realized it was all going horribly wrong, and he was a bit of a sadist, so he had this follow spot, so he whacked it onto me. And it felt, to be fair, this whole experience probably was only about a minute long, but it felt like an absolute age. And I have no idea if anyone had videoed it or anything. I've never seen it, fortunately, but that I remember very clearly. Everything went in slow motion. And, the funny thing is, we didn't play that song again for the tour. We dropped it from the set because I was too paranoid about it. We have played it since, though. I hasten to say.
That is superb.
That's a very good train wreck.
That is an extremely good one.
Brilliant
That's definitely
story.
in our top 5, that one. That's excellent. So, Clive, before we get on to the harrowing last question, what's coming up for you in the next year? I assume you've got some rescheduled touring. Hopefully.
Yeah, well, this year I think nothing. Nothing in terms of touring. Much that I would love to do something, I think that's not going to happen. But next year, yes, the rest of the Pendragon tour has been lifted out of where it should have been, and we've put that at the moment. That's sitting in April. It's actually longer than what was left. It's kind of like another tour. But I think we're all a little bit nervous as to whether even April will be possible, because it's not just a question of whether the venues will open. It's a question of whether the punters will come back.
That's right.
It's going to take a while before people are prepared to sort of mix again. So it's in April, and I hope it happens, but who knows? We did have the rescheduling of King's Ransom in Norway in February. They've now taken that out because we're pretty sure that won't happen, and that's been put forward like another year. And then in October next year, the October tour from this year with Arena has been delayed till October next year. And again, well, we're sort of hoping that one would happen. There's a little bit later in the year. There's a better chance, perhaps. So quite a lot of touring. There's a few sort of festivals and odds and sods that are due to happen during the year. And I think we're just going to have to see. I mean, the reality is, unless they can come up with some fantastic vaccine, I suspect that next year is going to be a bit messy as well.
Yes, yeah, agreed. And speaking of messy, let's talk about narrowing down 5 albums that you couldn't live without, Clive. I did give you a heads up, but I still sympathise.
Yeah, you did, although rather like the Total Recall song, I decided not to try and think too much about it at the beginning. Well, okay, I have to say that the difficulty for me is I'm very much guided by mood. In other words, people often say, what's your favourite album? Well, I think, what's my favourite album today?
Yeah.
Because it might well be different. But I'm going to try and come up with a couple of things that are just influential to me. Because I think those are the ones that would have the most impact and on the things I perhaps would want to listen to. And I've already mentioned one, which is King Arthur.
Yep.
Because that was one of my big discoveries as a kid at school. And following that, another one I mentioned would be Seconds Out, because that was the thing that actually has put me on this career.
That's right.
That was the thing that made me sort of make that decision. I want to include something classical. So actually, I can't say that it's an album in as much that, Beethoven brought out this latest album or something like that. But I think it was a very influential album for me. And despite the fact that Beethoven is probably my greatest idol in terms of composers, this is actually Berlioz's Symphonie fantastique. And in many ways, I've always argued this is perhaps one of the very first progressive rock albums. Mm. If you take the time to check it out properly, it's a concept album, if you like. It tells a story. It follows themes. It has these little motifs that reappear. It's got all the right elements. And to me, it was just, again, when I first discovered it as a kid and discovered the flights of fancy that somebody could go on to create the visual aspect. Because again, to me, this is a very visual symphony. Mm. So I think that's kind of, an important one for me. Right. On a very different area and perhaps a little controversial, I would actually elect to get the very one of these compilations album. I'm afraid that's cheating slightly, but nevertheless, I would really need to have the best of Monty Python.
Oh, nice.
Because I absolutely love them. And anyone who knows my Facebook sites, particularly during the lockdown, will know that I played a couple of the songs as sort of things to do, basically. I find them, obviously they're amusing, but they cheer me up sometimes. They just, there's just a silliness about the whole thing and a catchiness about the whole thing. And then I suppose because of my love of musicals, I would just have to have my favourite musical, which is Phantom of the Opera.
Nice.
So, I mean, I've got to be honest, I could probably keep on listing albums, but you've got to have 5.
That's right.
Those 5, I think, I'm pleased with that set of 5. I'll be very happy to have those, yeah.
And I'm going to do something we've never done on this podcast, which is add in Desert Island Books. So, for the sake of our listeners, because we've been able to watch Clive, he's got this brilliant T-shirt with the Overlook on it, which is obviously the hotel from Stephen King's The Shining. Clive, your top 5 Stephen King books.
Crikey. Well, if we're talking Stephen King, as opposed to This Is Not the Zombie Apocalypse by Clive Nolan, which is just sort of doing a bit of advertising.
We'll link to that in the show notes for sure.
Let me think. Okay, well, Salem's Lot, because that was my discovery of King. The Shining, because let's be honest, it's an absolute classic. But also Dr. Death, I think it's called, isn't it?
Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep.
Dr. Sleep. Sorry. I really, really loved that book. That was one that kind of took me by surprise because I thought, how do you do a sequel to The Shining? And in many ways, although it is a sequel to The Shining, it seems to have very little to do with it, but apart from obviously the main character. But I really loved the sort of atmosphere in that book. I thought that was very interesting. Now, the trouble I'm going to have now is remembering the title. There's another book. There were 3 of them. I think Umbrella's in the title somewhere, but it's a guy, and in fact, to start with, it's basically a crime novel, and the guy's an ex-cop, and I think it's called the something Umbrella.
You're talking about the Mr. Mercedes and the other 2, yeah.
I mean, basically, I thought, I know there were 3 books, and I'm sort of counting them at the moment as 1, but what was so fantastic, and again, this was my thing. I was thinking about Stephen King, is he's not in a horror. He's not in a hurry to get into the horror necessarily. No. He wants you to invest in the characters, and this is a set of 3 books. And in fact, the only supernatural element in the first book is probably in the last page. The whole thing is basically a crime novel.
That's right.
Which does its ins and outs and twists and turns. And it's only right at the very, very end that a whisper of something happens that makes you think, oh, that's interesting. Why? And then you have to wait till the next book to find out. And then the whole thing starts to expand into a much more supernatural, horrific kind of concept. So despite the fact that's 3 books, and the final one, I'm going to cheat even more, because basically the Dark Tower. Is it called the Dark
Yes,
Tower?
it is. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely.
There's only 7 of them, Clive.
Yeah, 7. But they could all be bound into one special bound volume for my Desert Island library. Because again, you get very attached to the characters. You can't help but sort of, I don't know, experience with them, as particularly the main guy, obviously, what he's going through, and of course the whole length of the journey that he has to take to establish something which I'm not going to say, but basically it leaves you even more kind of mystified in a way. Yeah. So, but to be absolutely honest, I have absolutely loved pretty much every book that he's done. There's another one called Thinner. Is it called Thinner?
Yeah.
Which again, it's sort of, he just captures some really strong ideas.
And
I suppose
for our listeners that haven't read any Stephen King, definitely don't fall for the stereotype that he's just a horror writer, just like no one should fall for the stereotype that Clive Nolan's just a prog rocker. And
absolutely right. Yes, I completely concur. We're never just anything.
That's right. And we can't thank you enough for joining us in all your multiple guises, and it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you.
Absolutely. Well, I've enjoyed being allowed to talk. You can tell I've been locked down. I just can't stop talking.
No, you've done well. And there we have it. As always, and I say it all the time, Paul, I enjoyed the hell out of that.
Yeah, that was great fun. You're really, really personable guy, and such an interesting history with the prog scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies to our non-Stephen King fan listeners. I just couldn't resist throwing that in because I am a rabid fan, and Clive was rocking the T-shirt, so I thought, why the hell not? So yeah, no, but huge thanks to Clive for taking part. Paul and I quite often talk after shows. Every single one of our guests so far over these 24 episodes have been absolutely brilliant to talk to, lovely people, very amenable, flexible, and we thank them all. All right, the Keyboard Chronicles will be back again in a fortnight or so, but just a reminder as always that you can keep in touch. One way of doing that is via our website at www.keyboardchronicles.com. We're on Facebook as always too at facebook.com/Keyboard Chronicles and on Twitter at thekeyboardchr1. If you like good old-fashioned email, then please do drop us a line at editor@keyboardchronicles.com. If you'd like to become an official supporter, we do have a Patreon account, and where for the price of a coffee a month, you can help us go from strength to strength. And a huge thank you to the thousands of people that have signed up for that. Paul, by the way, your jet is arriving, I think, next Monday. So if you can pick that up,
good.
Please.
I'm going to have to take time out from swimming in the money bin to meet it.
That's right. That's right. So if you want to help, fill up that money bin, patreon.com/Keyboard Chronicles. So a huge thank you again, Paul, for joining me again this episode. Always a pleasure.
Thanks again for inviting me. It's been great.
And most importantly, thanks to you all out there for listening, and we hope to see you back here next episode.